since I lived in Marion County, and I figured most of the people that were dead or they're probably gone already. But I wanted to say right up front that I'm not a preacher. I don't get messages to give you something. What I am is a teacher, and all I can do is to relate what I have been taught. And so I wanted to make that understood that, I didn't come up with this stuff on my own. I didn't get an inspiration coming into my brain or anything like this. Stuff that I learned I was taught. My qualifications for leading this session are none. I would feel much more comfortable sitting down and having somebody like Brother Tommy teach us and give me instruction rather than me trying to give you something. But I was asked by Brother Danny to conduct this breakout session, and he gave me the topic, Church, Please Be ... And I don't handle ... real well. So I started thinking about how to approach this, and several ideas popped in my mind, and I thought, church, please be faithful. God's faithful. We need to be faithful. Then I said, well, maybe church needs to be prayerful. Personable. We have to be personable, be able to reach out and accommodate people. Be courageous. The church needs to be, in this day and age, we definitely need to be courageous, and we need to be patient. We need to be patient with people. And then, all these things were going through my mind. I remembered Paul. Paul was, he was writing these letters to these young preachers about how to form the church, Titus and Timothy. And I said, surely I can find something that would be compelling in these books that would fit this session. But it seemed like the more I flipped and thought, in my mind would just run out of gas. I mean, it's just gone, nothing. And so I was pretty much at a loss as to how to even approach this session. And and it so happened that when Brother Danny had contacted me, I had just completed teaching through the Sermon on the Mount in Matthew, and specifically the lesson on honest judgment in Matthew 7, verses 1 through 5. And so using that lesson as a background, that's when I came up with the title of this session. Church, Please Be Biblical. And I'm using the background for this lesson is the Randall House commentary by Jeffrey Crabtree and Dr. Piccarilli. And I'm also using information from Erwin Lutzer's book, Who Are You to Judge? And so those will be the sources that I use for coming up with this session today. And so let's begin by reading our text in Matthew 7, verses 1 through 5 says, Judge not, that ye be not judged. For with what judgment ye judge, ye shall be judged. And with what measure ye mete, it shall be measured to you again. And why beholdest thou the mote that is in thy brother's eye, but considerest not the beam that is in thine own eye? Or how wilt thou say to thy brother, Let me pull the mote out of thine eye, and behold, a beam is in thine own eye? Thou hypocrite, first cast out the beam out of thine own eye, and then thou shalt see clearly to cast out the mote out of thy brother's eye. And so this verse 1, judge not, that you be not judged. That's probably the most quoted verse in the Bible by unbelievers anyway, and probably by a lot of church members as well. People do not want anyone judging their actions. It goes against their idea that I am the God of my life, and they don't want anybody interfering. They don't want anybody telling them what to do. But if you stop and consider the whole canon of the Scripture, Christians are not actually doing the judging. They are actually only relating the judgment that God has already rendered in His Word. And so even though the verse says, judge not, we know that we must judge. We have to apply God's judgment to doctrine and to conduct. Those are two things that we have to be careful to judge. And the responsibility to maintain the purity of the gospel has been given to all believers. And false doctrine, false teaching must be identified and dealt with accordingly. And so we have to be careful about our doctrine. We have to make judgments there. And the same is true for sinful conduct. Rooted in God's holiness, He has judged certain behavior to be sinful. And persons who are involved in a sinful lifestyle like that cannot be in a relationship with a holy God. And therefore, Christians, and especially pastors, have the responsibility to proclaim and protect the truth of God's Word. And so that requires making judgments. And so what was Jesus teaching? He said, judge not. Well, what Jesus was actually condemning was judgment that is hypercritical and condemning. It's that kind of judgment that leads to no positive results. And actually, it's the opposite of the beatitude of blessed are the merciful, or the spirit of forgive as you have been forgiven. This kind of judgment is condemning, and they raise themselves up into the place of God. I'm making a judgment against you. And it's that holier than thou attitude that is born out of a critical, bitter spirit. But look what it says in these verses again. It says, for with what judgment ye judge, ye shall be judged. And with what measure ye meet, it shall be measured to you again. If you are trying to be critical of someone without taking a critical review of your own life, God is going to use the same standard in measuring you as you have applied to others. He'll consider your use of truth and mercy and grace and how you were able to be forgiving of people. If you are just throwing the book at somebody on their first offense, or you're making a mountain out of a molehill, guess what? God's going to judge you the same way. He's going to use that same measure in applying it to you. And so we have to be careful. We have to be careful in making these judgments, because there is a great tendency to identify the sins of others without recognizing what's going on in our own life. So Jesus here, he was comparing sins to different sized pieces of wood. Jesus said the hypercritical person condemns the mote, the speck, or the chip in the other person's eye, while having a beam stuck in his own eye. And so obviously this is hyperbole. Jesus is making the point, but the real thing is clear. We must not be judgmental of others when we have large faults of our own, because our personal faults skew honest and fair judgment. It clouds our viewpoint of things. And this is easily seen when we think back of King David in 2 Samuel 12. I'm not going to turn there for time's sake, but David could see how evil it was to steal a man's lamb. But he could not see the greater sins of adultery and murder that was present in his own life. And this is the truth that you can always count on. Sin distorts our perception. And the sin in David's life had distorted his perception to the point that he was blind to his own sins. And David clearly saw the sins of others, but he could not see his own. And that should be a lesson to us. We have no right to judge others until we have been willing to examine and admit the truth about ourselves. And so Jesus says, "Thou hypocrite, first cast out the beam out of thine own eye, and then thou shalt see clearly to cast out the mote out of thy brother's eye." And according to Jesus, persons who insist on condemning the faults of others while ignoring their own sins are hypocrites. And the hypocrisy is this: they are pretending to be void of any fault at all, when in reality they have serious problems in their own life. And so Jesus, he didn't mean that we should never rebuke another person's sin. A person who has a splinter in their eye, that splinter needs to come out. Even if it's a little speck, you need to get it out. But he also didn't mean to say that we should never help somebody with their own problem. Galatians 6:1 makes it clear, "Brethren, if a man overtaken with a fault, ye which are spiritual, restore such a one in the spirit of meekness, considering thyself, lest thou also be tempted." So Jesus wasn't saying that we're not to help people, help them take that speck out of their eye. But what he is stating, that before folks can help others, they must have their own life in order. And that has given rise to a major fault in the church. People reason that nobody's perfect, so I'm not qualified to condemn or to judge anyone's behavior or their morality. And further, I don't want anybody judging me. They're not perfect. And so they are content with just putting a border around their own private world, their own religious views, and they miss the admonition of verse 5. Get the beam out so that you'll be able to see and help others. And so Jesus here in this passage was addressing a major issue for these legalistic Jewish Pharisees, and that was just this hypercritical judgments. But we today are facing a completely different society. We're facing people who are committed to this, Dr. Lutzer calls it this radical individualism. The live and let live crowd. I've got my borders up. I'm going to stay right here. What you do is your business. What I do is my business. Don't come in. They're content to just live and let live. And that is prevalent not just across society, but that's prevalent even in church people today. And so with this basis of this review of Matthew 7, 1 through 5, I'm going to try to make some applications so that we can see exactly how that's supposed to play out in our lives. A few decades ago, the Bible was widely accepted as truth, but in our postmodern culture, the idea that there is a universal set of values that are applicable to all cultures at all times, that's been thrown out. That's been rejected and replaced with the belief that truth is whatever one's personal response is to the circumstances that they face. In other words, I am the source of truth. And it doesn't matter if it contradicts what you say is truth. That's okay. What's truth is truth to me. And that's the only thing that matters. And a belief is not evaluated anymore about if it's true or false, but it's being evaluated, is it fair? And the idea that salvation comes through Jesus Christ alone, that doesn't seem fair. What about the people in Africa? They haven't even heard about Jesus. That doesn't seem to be fair. And so Christians they get labeled, they get considered bigoted because of our stance on gay rights, this same-sex marriage, abortion, all of these social issues, our society, and they will accept any religion that comes down the pike except biblical Christianity. And so that's where they come back with this quote, judge not. Stay out of here. They're not interested in learning or hearing about the judgments that God has said in His Word. It's not relevant to them. They are the source of truth. Secondly, the church has been given the ministry of reconciliation in 2 Corinthians 5, and we're called to be ambassadors for Christ. And we've been given the Great Commission, as Brother Tommy has already told us this morning, to go and make disciples for the honor of Jesus Christ. But the church has lost much of the power to influence society today. And the major reason for that is that the world has crept into the church. And the church is like a boat out on the lake. That's fine, safe. But when the lake gets in the boat, you've got a problem. And when the world is getting into the church, we have a problem. And if we're going to